know this will be recorded. Welcome to our fourth and final session of Mastering Your Meals, which has been a collaboration between Purdue Extension Health and Human Sciences and Kimball International. And my name is Meagan Jaspersen. I'm the Health and Human Sciences educator for Purdue Extension in Perry and Spencer counties. And today we are going to be talking about stocking your kitchen and some of the things that you should think about to have in your pantry and your cupboard that are just easy to grab and go. So I'm going to let Meagan Brothers introduce herself, and she's going to give us a little bit of education this morning, and then we're going to cook a dish that is easy to just pull for a quick weeknight dinner that you should have ingredients for on hand in your pantry. So I'll turn it over to Meagan.
Good morning, everyone. I am Meagan Brothers, the Health and Human Sciences educator here in Vanderburgh County. So as Meagan said, we're going to talk about our pantry and stocking those pantries so that we can easily make those healthy meals. So we have talked a lot about, hang on just a second, let me try this a different way. We have talked about lots of different things, and a lot of it involves eating healthy and finding ways to easily eat healthy and quickly eat healthy. But the most important thing that we have to do when we're thinking about the meals that we're going to make, whether we're meal prepping or we're making a quick, easy dinner at home, is that we need to make sure we have the supplies on hand. Because the last thing that you want to do is have to go to the store or decided not to cook because you don't have what you need on hand. So we have compiled a not exhaustive list, but a pretty comprehensive list of some things that you can have in your pantries on hand to help with that process, so that you literally just have to grab what you need and make your meal quick and easy that way. And it'll help your planning, and it'll help your cooking much easier, much less stress, one less thing to think about. So let's talk about our refrigerators and freezers, because what we usually, when we think about our pantry, we're thinking about those dry goods, and we will talk about those too. But it is helpful to have some things in our fridge and freezer that are easy to grab and are pretty shelf stable things, so that they aren't going bad before we use them all. So you can actually freeze bread and have that on hand if you don't eat a whole lot of bread. Or your family doesn't eat a whole lot of bread. This is a way for you to be able to keep that bread and keep it so that when you're ready to use it and you're not sitting there with half moldy loaves of bread sitting in your kitchen. So you can freeze bread. So we do, that is something you can have on hand. But even things like your frozen fish, frozen chicken, frozen meat, it helps to be able to have some of that. So all you have to do is thaw it out and it's ready to cook. And frozen vegetables, stock up on those frozen vegetables, because those are so handy to have. We talked last week, I think, about the flash frozen vegetables. So those are really great to have on hand. Just grab them out of your freezer. You can even get the steamable bags that all you have to do is put the bag into the microwave, put it in there for a couple minutes, and you have your vegetables cooked. So it doesn't really get a whole lot easier than that. And even in your refrigerator, you can have some things on hand, like your dairy products. They will last quite a while usually. Always check the expiration date. But things like butter, even your yogurts, your cheeses, and even some vegetables that are more shelf stable, like carrots and celery. I use those a lot in a lot of different recipes. And those are really easy vegetables to just add into different recipes, to soups and things like that. They last a while when you have them in the refrigerator, so they're good to have on hand. And eggs last a long time too, so it's always good to have eggs on hand, so that they are used in a lot of recipes. They're used if you want to make like batter for your meats, and there's all kinds of uses for eggs. And yogurts are good too, salad dressings, things like that are really easy to use and great to have on hand. So baking supplies is another one, and I have a funny story about this. So I don't do a ton of baking, but I like to bake. And usually when I bake from scratch. So I was making muffins on Sunday, and I didn't check ahead of time because I knew I'd have this stuff on hand because I always have these ingredients on hand. And of course, when I go to grab the baking powder or the baking soda, they are nowhere to be found. So I think I had taken them to the office for a program or something. But so I actually had to Google how to substitute because I was literally in the middle of my recipe and had my daughter. So it's not like I could just really quickly run to the store, and honestly just didn't feel like it. So these are good things to have on hand. And things like your baking powder, baking soda, oils, cornstarch, even dry and evaporated milk. So these are very shelf stable. They will last much, much longer than fresh milk. And they're really great to use in recipes that call for milk. You can actually drink them as milk if you want to go that route. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that, but you can use them for that. But they're really great to use in recipes that call for milk. And if you don't drink a lot of milk on your own, these are really great to have on hand. Things like flour, sugar, all those kinds of things. And even there are different extracts. So vanilla, almond, lemon, those different kinds of flavors that really go nicely in baking, that and a lot of different kinds of recipes too. Oats and even cocoa powder would be good to have on hand for some of those baking. And these are kind of those staples of baking. You might have a couple other random sorts of ingredients that you need, but these will basically get you almost any kind of recipe that you have. So the seasonings, this is, if you go down a seasoning aisle, you could fill your kitchen with different seasonings and spices and herbs. But these are kind of the basics that are used in a lot of different kinds of recipes. And I do recommend having a pretty good stock of different herbs and spices, because when we don't have these, our first thing that we grab is that salt. And so these are going to give you lots of different flavors to your different foods. It'll help if you're wanting to look at some variety and trying not to be real plain with your cooking and add some spice. Spices are a good way to just change up the flavor without having to do a whole lot of other kinds of changes. So these give you kind of some of those basics that are used. If you have other spices, think about the recipes you make. If you do a lot of different kinds of ethnic cooking, then there's specific spices that are great to have on hand for those. But then even some of your sauces like the soy sauce and Worcestershire sauce, even vinegars. So you can have several different kinds of vinegars on hand. They'll last a long time. Again, they add lots of different flavors to different recipes. And always have lemon juice, because I've done that too where I haven't had lemon juice, and it's amazing the different things that you can use with a lot of these different spices and herbs. And I will point out too that it says garlic and onion powder. So you want to stay away from garlic and onion and other kinds of salt, because those are mostly salt with a little bit of that spice added in, whereas garlic powder and onion powder are just a minced version of that spice. So always look for the powder versions of things. You can buy blends, so you can buy the Italian seasoning blends. You can buy like the Mrs. Dash seasonings, like the lemon pepper seasonings. You can buy blends, or you can make your own. So I have usually a lot of different kinds of seasonings available, and I'll just make my own little seasoning mix if I'm wanting to make chili, or if I want to make an Italian dish or something. And you can always mix them up and make lots of different kinds of things and have fun with it. Seasonings are really fun to work with and play around with. So our dry goods, our canned goods, I wish this was a picture of my pantry, but it is not. My pantry is not this beautiful. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there with some of it. So I will point out too that you can see these containers that are open containers, the clear containers that have the bulk items in it. So the dried and canned goods a lot of times are great to buy in bulk. We don't always recommend buying in bulk, especially for those foods that you're not going to eat and might just go bad in like your refrigerator or even on your counter. But these clear containers are nice to be able to buy in bulk. You can transfer them. They take up less space usually. And they give you a more airtight seal, which will help them last longer. So I'm not endorsing, I don't even know what brand those are, but there's lots of different options for those clear containers, and label them, make sure you know what's in them. But things like whole grains, so there's a ton of different kinds of grains out there. Whole grains are going to give you more fiber and nutrients than the white grains, but having a variety of grains like rice, pasta, quinoa, barley, all of those will help add some different variety to your meals, a variety of cereals. So not just eating cereal with milk, but even using cereals to make breading on chicken instead of having breadcrumbs and cereal and, you know, a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of times those dry cereals can be used for that. And they're also used in a lot of baking recipes. The canned and dried beans, I recommend getting a nice variety of different beans, black beans, pinto beans, white beans, kidney beans, and again, use them in a ton of different recipes. Fruit, so canned and dried fruit is good to have on hand. It lasts longer than fresh fruit. You can even dry and can your own fruit if you want to go that far, but they're nice just to have staples on hand. Different nuts, lots of tomatoes. Tomatoes are used in tons of recipes, and you can do all kinds of stuff with the different kinds of tomatoes. And even canned meat. So canned fish and canned meat are helpful to have especially if you don't have a lot of freezer space. These are great to have as staples. You can throw them in salads, you can throw them in casseroles. They're really easy to use. And so the biggest thing I want to share with you guys is the safety of these foods. So we want to make sure that even though these are more shelf stable and generally more food safe, you still have to be aware of how you're storing them. So you want to store them in a cool, dry place to keep them that safe and keep them in that condition that they're already in, to keep them more shelf stable. You also, when you're getting ready to use it, wipe off the lid with soap and water on a rag, a clean rag, or a paper towel or something. Because there could be some bacteria that's in that lid. And so if it's there and you open it with a can opener, then all of that is going to go into your food. So wipe off that lid before you open the can. If you open your can and then don't use the whole product or even opening a box or anything like that, check it. It should say on the container whether it needs to be refrigerated. Most like canned products need to be refrigerated after they've been opened. So make sure you refrigerate it. Don't just put some foil over it. Generally, we recommend you put it in a different container with an airtight lid to keep that shelf stable. And then you have about up to 7 days to use that product before you need to toss it. So if you struggle to buy the giant containers of pasta sauce and only use a little at a time, maybe invest and get some of the smaller containers so that you're not wasting some of that product too. And then watch for dents on your cans. So I know some people will go to a store to buy dented cans because they're cheaper, but the dented can could potentially mean that there could be leakage. It could mean that there's been contamination into the can if it's been punctured or poked. And it doesn't last as long. So I don't really recommend buying dented cans, or not if there has a little bit of a nick on it, but if it has any more than your finger, like your fingertip in there, then I would probably not buy that can. So that was a whole lot of information. We are going to have handouts with these different things on them so that you guys can have like a reference list for it. But when you're doing your meal planning, when you're looking at what you already have in your pantry, it really helps to have some of those staples. And every time you do your grocery shopping, I recommend checking for some of those staples so that you don't go and try and grab your baking powder and you don't have any, or whatever it is. But sometimes it does help to have those if you have space, of course. And space is always a consideration with any of this stuff. Okay, so with that, I'm going to put our survey into the chat box for you guys to complete for us. It helps us to know how we're doing, and it helps give us information for our funders. And I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
Okay, so Megan gave us a ton of information and it was all super relevant. So what we're going to do is put that information into action. And today we are going to be cooking some pasta with tomatoes and white beans. This is a recipe that we found from Penn State Extension, and everything that is in this recipe just popped up on Megan's slideshow. So I'm going to be showing you guys what we're doing. This is a really simple recipe. We talked about having pasta on hand. It uses 100% whole grain penne pasta, and you can buy that super cheap. It's just $1 a box, and this recipe calls for half a box of that, so 50 cents for your pasta for this recipe. Really affordable. It also calls for some of the canned things Megan mentioned, which I'm going to show you and then dump into my skillet. If you were with us last week, we did kind of a skillet dump meal. This is another similar thing where you just throw the stuff together and let it simmer a bit, and then you have dinner, which is why I love it. So Megan mentioned having a variety of beans. This recipe actually calls for 1 can of cannellini beans. I did not have those in my cupboard, but I did have Great Northern beans, which is another just white variety of bean. And you guys, usually when I'm doing cooking demos for folks, I do have to like make myself a grocery list and go to the store. But this is a recipe I looked at and I was like, I literally don't need to do any shopping for this because I have it. So it's just an easy one to pull. These beans are drained and rinsed. We talked about last week the importance of getting rid of some of that sodium when we're using some of our canned beans. So we have our beans in there. It also calls for 2 cans of Italian style diced tomatoes. Okay, importance of having a stocked kitchen. I had diced tomatoes, but they were not Italian style. So I'm gonna dump my tomatoes in here, and because I have a fairly well-stocked stash of spices, I'm just gonna add a little bit of Italian seasoning to that. And voila, I've just turned regular diced tomatoes into Italian style diced tomatoes. And if you're looking at me wondering why is she just shaking that in there, I come from a long line of women who just a pinch and a dash. I know some people are very strict recipe followers, but this is how I do it, and usually it turns out okay. So we've got our tomatoes in there with our beans and a little bit of Italian seasoning. I'm just gonna let that simmer down for a little bit. And the recipe calls for a couple minutes to just get that thickened up a bit in my skillet. And I did pre-cook our pasta today, so you guys didn't have to watch me boil that. But again, this is, if you were with us last week, we did 20-minute meals. It takes like 8 to 10 minutes to boil pasta, this style of pasta. So this is another really quick one that you can just easily pull and do. So while that is simmering a bit, I do want to show you, Megan mentioned having some spices on hand. I love these spice racks that are available. I keep mine right next to my stove, so I have a wide variety of things that I can just easily pull and dump. And obviously this is not completely comprehensive. So again, we talked about having things that you use frequently, easily accessible. You can see that in my pantry, and I hope you all aren't getting seasick, but my top shelf, I've got more of my baking needs, some vanilla, some nuts, some chocolate, other almond extracts, and things that I would use for typical baking needs. And then on my shelves here, I have some other stuff that is not in my spinny rack that we frequently use. Some chili powder, crushed red pepper. Again, the garlic powders, make sure you stay away from those salts and use the powders instead, like Megan mentioned. And then I have some refills. The nice thing about this rack is that it comes pre-filled with spices. However, if you continue to use them, they do run out. So the beauty of spices is that they're usually not super expensive either. So it's typically a quick run to the grocery store to get some of those refilled. Okay, so we are gonna stir this sauce. It's simmering down nicely. I don't know if you can see inside my skillet. Let me tip you guys up a little bit. And this is going to be a really nice base for a good healthy pasta dish, because the other ingredient that this calls for, and we will send you the recipe like Megan said, is frozen spinach. So again, these come in little boxes. These are super, super helpful to have on hand in your freezer. They don't take up a lot of space. Again, they're relatively cheap and they go from field to frozen. And so you're maintaining a lot of nutrients. And I know sometimes it's hard to sneak in those vegetables at dinner time, but I have been significantly motivated by having to feed a little person to make sure that I'm providing good nutrition there as well. So frozen veggies and other easily accessible things have been clutch in our house for making sure that we are providing good nutrition for all of us. And so this sauce is starting to simmer. I'm just gonna add my spinach. It's really easy because they pre-chop it for you. We just needed to thaw this out, which I did. And typically with chopped spinach, when you're adding it to recipes, they like for you to drain it and squeeze some of that water out. And so I have done that. And again, this is we thought this was a great example meal for today's session because it's a quick grab and go. It is nutritious. You've got all of these vegetables. The beans provide some protein. And then we've got some whole grains in there. And then you have dinner on the table. It's going to continue to let that simmer a bit and cook down. And you have to be careful. I like this too because the base of this is literally just chopped Roma tomatoes. And some of those pre-made pasta sauces, you've got to look at your ingredients because those can have a lot of added sugar and other things that are not necessarily good for us. So a quick tomato-based recipe is really a great option. And that's really boiling and thickening up really nicely. So I'm going to show you guys the final step is just adding some of that pasta. With a bit of our sauce and sprinkling with a bit of Parmesan. How long did that meal take me? Boiled the noodles for 8 minutes, dumped everything together, let it simmer for about 5. That's dinner in about 15 minutes. That is healthy and nutritious and filling. So there you have it. And it was stuff that I pulled directly from my pantry that I had on hand. So I would really encourage you all to look at that pantry stocking list that Megan talked about today. And we will send this out to you all in the form of handouts that has a really pretty good comprehensive list for where to start. And as Megan said, as you use these things, make sure you restock them because it's just nice to come home, and if you didn't plan ahead, like we talked about in our meal planning webinar, you can easily pull something and throw dinner together that doesn't take that much effort. So I have my lunch ready, and that was our recipe for the day. We really want to encourage you guys, again, like Megan said, to make sure that you take that survey and give us some feedback. And additionally, we're really interested in learning about what else you guys might want to know about during these sessions, if we have future sessions. So if you would throw that in the chat box, if you have any ideas for things that you'd be interested in learning about. And I'm going to turn it back over to Megan, who looks like she's mobile and ready to show us something else.
Yeah, I'm in my kitchen, so I thought I'd show you guys my pantry, but no judgment allowed because it's not the cleanest in the world, but it gives you guys kind of a sense of what I have. And so I'm going to show you guys my spice cabinet. So I have a ton of spices, and I generally try to keep the ones I use most in the front, or at least on the bottom down here, so they're easier to grab. But I also have my oils and I have red wine vinegar, lots of different kinds of things for that. And then I'm going to show you guys my baking random stuff, but I've got like nuts in there. I've got my powders. I do have baking soda and baking powder finally again. But I've got lots of things. I've got my dried fruit up there as well that are really easy to throw into different recipes. And then this is part of my cabinet for my canned goods, my oats, peanut butter, that kind of thing. Another thing too that I didn't include on the list, but I use a lot of, is a garlic. I don't always have fresh garlic on hand, so I like buying the pre-minced garlic because it's easier for me to use, and it's worth my time to buy it that way versus having the fresh garlic. And another thing I'm gonna show you guys is this trail mix thing right here. So I have my flour and sugar in their own little canisters, so they're always on here. But I do have my trail mix that I keep on my counter because we're on the go, and so it's really easy to grab it on the go, to put them in little containers for my daughter, that kind of thing. Then I have a ton of apples, and I also, potatoes and onions are another thing that are great to keep on counters and to have a nice stock of, easy to add into recipes. So if you're going to have fresh, if you want that kind of fresher produce, onions and potatoes are great to have on hand too. So with that, that's kind of my part of my kitchen. Yeah, and so put those questions in there, put your comments in there, and let us know what else you want to know about.
And just as a reminder, as health and human sciences educators, when you're thinking about topics that you might be interested in, whether you're throwing that information in the chat or responding on our survey, our umbrella of topics covers food, family, money, and health. So if you're interested in learning about any specific topics related to any of those 4 areas, we would be really interested in hearing about that. And if we do get some good ideas, we can come up with some future series sessions that we can provide for you guys, just like this one. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the information that we covered today?
So I have a question on the, my kids have been asking me this week, how did you do this when we were all little? You know, how did you cook all this food? And is this okay to do? Like I brown a bunch of hamburger and then throw it in freezer bags. I cook a whole chicken and I portion it out and throw it in freezer bags.
Yes.
So I said, always whenever I want tacos or I want chicken noodle soup like I made yesterday, I just grab a bag out. It's already cooked, shredded up, and I just throw it in the pot. So
that's
those
perfect.
Those are the kind of things that I've been trying to help my kids with, because they're like, oh, this is horrible. And I'm like, it's not that bad if you kind of plan ahead. And like even to go ahead and cook full chicken breasts and throw them in the freezer, and then you can either slice them or you can shred them or you can eat them whole.
Exactly. Oh yeah,
that
absolutely.
is the epitome of meal planning, and you're awesome. If you instill that in your kids and just teach them how to do that, it does take a little forethought and prep, but if you can do that on the weekend and have meat in your freezer for the next 2 weeks, that's awesome. I know as a working parent with a working spouse with children that it can be really difficult to get dinner on the table after a long day. But if you've got that easy to pull stuff that you can just throw from the freezer down to your fridge, let it thaw out overnight, and then throw it into a meal the next day, it makes my life 100 times easier. And I know I've said this before, but if I don't do the meal prep and the planning, my family is probably eating cereal for dinner.
Yep.
So if you can get that ingrained in your kids to just take the extra time to do that prep work, it has really made my life 100 times easier.
Oh yeah,
and what was hard for me was cooking for 7 and now only cooking for 2. So now I'm trying to redo things, and I'll freeze a lot of stuff. You know, I'll make baked spaghetti and I'll freeze a portion of it so we have it for later. Or you know, I still make more than I need, but I'll freeze it.
Yeah, that's a great plan. I was gonna say, when I make things like soups or some of those foods that are really easy to freeze, I make extra so that I can put it in the freezer and have it for whenever I don't have time to make a meal or didn't meal prep, which is more often than not for me. But but yeah, that is a great idea too, to make extra whatever you're making, casseroles or soups or things like that, and then freeze those portions so that you can have them whenever you don't have time to cook.
Yes, and cooking your meat ahead of time is huge too. That's safe as long as you're following those safety guidelines and getting it in the freezer in a timely manner. There is no food safety issues with doing that at all.
Yeah, I'll chime in and say I've done the same thing as Sherry for years. I would, pre-cook my hamburger and I would do it in bulk, put several packages into the freezer. Saves on cleanup too. You only have your mess one time. So that part was huge for me. Something else that I've been doing lately is I'll prepare, say, salads, just like a chef salad for my lunch. I'll do like a whole head of lettuce at one time. Actually, I've been doing maybe like 2 heads of lettuce at a time, packing them into jars, and you can pack them in really tight, and then put, a little bit of cheese on there, some tomatoes, onions, carrots, whatever I would normally put onto a salad, um, and and just close up that jar, seal it up. Everything's packed in so tight. I mean, I can do several jars and they're good for a week. I might do one in a quart jar and it might be our family meal in the evening, and the rest are for lunch or something. So that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Absolutely.
And anything like that involves just a little forethought, but then you have a ready to go meal, it makes a world of a difference. And so kudos to you all for doing the meal prep. And like I said in our earlier session, it does take some time, but if you just devote that time to it ahead of time, it really is a time saver in the long run. Okay, any other questions or comments today? Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us. And again, like I said, just make sure you take that survey. Let us know what else you're looking for. And hopefully we'll have some more sessions in the future.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.